A billionaire father walks into a luxury restaurant with his disabled son. Minutes later, a waitress asks the boy to lead a dance, and the entire room falls silent as something unforgettable unfolds. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Meridian Hotel glowed like 1,000 tiny suns as billionaire Richard Hale stepped through the revolving glass doors, the sound of his polished shoes echoing against the marble floor. At his side rolled his 8-year-old son, Ethan, whose small hands rested lightly on the armrests of a sleek, custom wheelchair. Richard's face carried the cool determination of a man used to commanding empires, his jaw set in a way that made strangers instinctively step aside. For years, colleagues had whispered that his heart was as hard as the steel towers his company built. Tonight, however, a different kind of weight pressed on his chest. It was Ethan's birthday, and for once Richard had promised to leave the world of endless board meetings and late-night calls behind. After years of therapy and hospital visits, his son had asked for only one gift: a single evening in a place that felt magical, where father and son could sit together without the rush of schedules or the hum of medical machines. The hotel's grand entrance opened into a ballroom restaurant alive with music and color. Warm jazz notes drifted from a live quartet in the corner, mingling with the soft clink of crystal glasses and the quiet murmur of conversation. Golden light spilled from the chandeliers, scattering across velvet-draped tables set with silver cutlery and tall candles that flickered like tiny beacons. The scent of roasted herbs and freshly baked bread floated through the air, inviting guests to linger. Waiters in tailored black uniforms moved in a seamless rhythm, carrying polished trays that reflected the glow overhead. Every detail, the gleaming floors, the hushed service, the elegant swirl of dresses and dark suits, spoke of quiet luxury and a night meant to be remembered. Among the graceful movement of staff and guests glided Maya, a young black waitress whose presence carried its own kind of light. Her steps were steady and unhurried, her posture confident but warm. She had worked long hours in restaurants since finishing school, but she never let fatigue dull the brightness in her eyes. Tonight she wore the hotel's uniform, a crisp white blouse and tailored black vest, but her genuine smile made it feel less like a costume and more like a natural extension of her spirit. As she passed between tables, she noticed the new arrivals at the far side of the room. The sharply dressed man whose tailored suit seemed to announce success, and the boy whose wheelchair caught the shimmer of candlelight. Maya's gaze lingered on the child. Ethan's eyes were alive with curiosity, darting from the soaring ceiling to the musicians in the corner as though every detail of the evening were a secret gift waiting to be discovered. There was a quiet dignity in the way he held himself, despite the careful adjustments he made to keep comfortable. She recognized the stiffness in his father's shoulders too, a tension that spoke of responsibility, perhaps even a hint of discomfort in a setting meant for celebration. Something about the contrast between the boy's eager wonder and the man's guarded composure stirred an unexpected tug at her heart. Carrying a tray of crystal water glasses, Maya wove closer to their table, catching fragments of their presence before a single word was spoken. The faint scent of Richard's cologne, sharp and clean. The soft creak of Ethan's chair as he shifted to see the band. She sensed, without knowing why, that this dinner meant more than a routine night out. It felt like a fragile bridge between a father locked inside a world of deadlines and a child who longed for nothing more than time together. As Richard guided the wheelchair toward their reserved corner, the bustle of the restaurant seemed to bend around them. Couples turned discreetly to glance, their conversations pausing for a heartbeat before the music filled the silence again. Richard maintained his practiced calm, offering a polite nod to the maitre d', who led them to a table draped in deep burgundy linen. He pulled out a chair for himself and checked his watch, the habit of a man forever measuring minutes. Yet when he looked down at Ethan, whose face glowed with quiet excitement, something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly. Maya approached with a menu tucked under her arm, ready to greet them, but she slowed for a breath. There was an energy about the boy that drew her in, a spark of life that refused to be overshadowed by the elegant setting or the silent worries she sensed from his father. She could not yet know the details of their story, but instinct told her that this evening carried a deeper purpose, one that might unfold in ways none of them could predict. From their corner table, Richard barely looked at the menu, already distracted by a stream of buzzing phone notifications that lit up his sleek black phone like tiny warning lights. Each vibration tugged at him. Urgent messages from his assistants, updates from overseas partners, reminders of deals worth millions. He turned the screen face down with a quiet sigh, but the habit of glancing back every few seconds was hard to break. Across from him, Ethan sat upright in his wheelchair, his small fingers drumming on the polished wood of the table in a rhythm that matched the gentle swing of the live jazz band. The boy's eyes followed the musicians, as if the music itself carried a secret invitation only he could hear. Ethan loved rhythm. His physical therapist often said that music gave his body courage, that a strong beat made the stiffness of his muscles soften for just a moment. Tonight, the sound of the stand-up bass and the smooth wail of the saxophone seemed to lift him right out of the velvet chair. He tapped faster, shoulders swaying slightly, his face glowing with anticipation. Richard finally looked up, noticing the sparkle of excitement across his son's face. It startled him. How long had it been since he'd seen Ethan this alive, this completely caught in a moment that didn't involve doctors or careful schedules? He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps to ask if Ethan wanted a special dish or a slice of cake, but the words stalled. Instead, he found himself simply watching. Just then, Maya approached, gliding between tables with the quiet confidence of someone who understood how to bring warmth to even the most formal setting. The low lighting caught the soft sheen of her hair as she crouched down beside Ethan, lowering herself so their eyes met on the same level. Her smile was easy and unforced, the kind that made a stranger feel instantly at home. "Happy birthday, young man," she said, her voice a gentle melody of its own. "I hear we have a very special guest tonight. What's your favorite song?" Ethan's grin spread wide, his whole face lighting up like the candles waiting for him later. "Anything I can dance to," he answered without hesitation, his words bubbling with pure hope. Richard raised an eyebrow before he could stop himself. Dance? The thought almost made him laugh, a sharp, nervous reaction that he quickly swallowed. Ethan could barely stand for more than a few seconds without someone supporting him. For years, Richard had watched therapists coax small movements from his son's tight muscles, celebrating each small victory but never imagining something as free as dancing. His mind leapt to practical worries. What if Ethan tried to stand and fell? What if this kind of talk only ended in disappointment? Before Richard could form a careful objection, Maya's eyes sparkled with a quiet mischief, as though she had already heard his silent protests and brushed them aside. "Then we need something special," she said with a certainty that caught Richard off guard. She turned her head toward the quartet in the corner, lifting a hand in a small, graceful signal. The bandleader caught her gesture immediately, exchanging a quick nod with his musicians. The upright bass slowed, the trumpets softened, and within seconds a new melody floated into the room. A soft but upbeat tune, playful enough to invite movement, yet gentle enough to feel safe. Conversations at nearby tables faded into a murmur as the first notes unfurled like a warm breeze across the polished floor. Ethan's eyes widened with delight. He shifted in his chair, his body leaning forward as if the music itself was calling his name. The rhythm pulsed through him, a beat he couldn't ignore. His fingers resumed their tapping, quicker now, in perfect time with the drums. Richard felt a strange mixture of emotions: pride, worry, and something softer he couldn't quite name. He had spent years protecting Ethan from disappointment, carefully steering him away from anything that might highlight his limitations. Yet in this moment, watching his son's eager response to a simple melody, Richard sensed a possibility he hadn't allowed himself to imagine. Maya stayed beside Ethan, her presence steady and encouraging. "This one's just for you," she whispered, her voice almost drowned by the gentle swell of the music. "Would you like to feel the beat a little closer?" Ethan nodded eagerly, his excitement almost trembling in the air. Richard opened his mouth again, ready to caution or question, but the words refused to form. Instead, he sat back, his heart unexpectedly quickening with the same rhythm that now guided his son's small, determined taps on the table. The restaurant seemed to shift around them. The clinking of cutlery softened, the laughter of other guests faded, and for a breathless moment, the only thing that existed was the bright, hopeful energy of a boy ready to follow the music wherever it led. As the first notes floated through the room, the warm jazz seemed to wrap the restaurant in a shimmering hush. Maya knelt beside Ethan's wheelchair, her dark eyes steady and kind. "Would you like to lead a dance step with me?" she asked softly, as if inviting him into a secret that only the two of them could share. Richard nearly choked on his water. The question felt impossible, almost reckless. He can't," he began, his voice breaking with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Years of medical advice echoed in his mind. Limited mobility, careful balance, avoid sudden strain. He pictured the therapist's warnings, the countless sessions where even a single step required meticulous planning and support. But before Richard could string another word together, Ethan turned toward him. The boy's face lit up with a hope so pure it stole the air from the room. "Dad, please," he said, his voice trembling with excitement rather than doubt. Maya extended her hand, palm up, her smile a quiet promise. "Only if you want to," she said gently. She didn't push. She simply waited, the music swelling around them. Ethan nodded eagerly, his small fingers curling around hers. A current of anticipation rippled through the tables nearby. Conversations faltered, the clink of silverware ceased. Guests leaned subtly forward, drawn by something more powerful than curiosity. It was as if the entire restaurant understood that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Richard felt his heart pound against his ribs. He wanted to protect his son, to keep him safe from the risk of embarrassment or a fall. Yet he couldn't ignore the brightness in Ethan's eyes or the calm certainty in Maya's expression. Something deep within Richard, something he'd kept buried beneath business meetings and endless deals, told him to stay silent. With careful strength and the quiet grace of someone who had practiced compassion every day of her life, Maya slid her arm beneath Ethan's and helped him rise. His legs trembled immediately, the unfamiliar effort visible in every muscle. But he was standing. Richard's breath caught. For years he had hired the best doctors and spent fortunes on treatments. But he had never imagined his son upright in the center of a crowded room, lit by the glow of chandeliers and 100 watchful eyes. The music guided them forward. Maya moved slowly, matching Ethan's tentative rhythm. "You set the pace," she whispered, so only he could hear. "This is your dance." Ethan shifted his weight carefully, taking a small, shaky step. His sneakers squeaked softly against the polished floor. Another step followed, hesitant but real. The band's melody swelled, the gentle drumbeat almost like a heartbeat beneath his own. A murmur of admiration swept across the room. Couples paused mid-conversation, wine glasses hovering in midair. Some guests pressed their hands to their chests. Others smiled through sudden tears. They weren't merely watching a child move. They were witnessing a quiet miracle. Richard remained rooted to the spot, a storm of emotions churning inside him. Pride, awe, guilt, and something more profound surged all at once. He thought of the endless nights in hospitals, the spreadsheets of experimental treatments, the way he had buried himself in work to avoid the ache of helplessness. And now, here was Ethan, standing tall, not because of money or medicine, but because someone had offered him a hand and believed he could lead. Maya let Ethan guide her through the gentle sway of the tune, never rushing, never correcting. Each tiny step seemed to echo louder than the music itself. Richard's throat tightened as he saw his son's face bloom with confidence. The boy wasn't just walking. He was owning the moment, the entire room moving in silent rhythm with his courage. When Ethan took a third step, a ripple of soft applause began, hesitant at first, then growing as more guests joined in. The sound was gentle, respectful, as though the crowd understood the fragility of the scene and wanted only to encourage. Ethan's smile widened, and a faint laugh escaped him, a sound Richard hadn't heard in years without a shadow of strain. The music carried them a little longer, each movement a quiet triumph. Richard felt the sting of tears and didn't care who saw. He realized he was witnessing something greater than any business victory, his son discovering freedom, even if only for a few precious minutes. Finally, as the last notes of the song drifted into silence, Maya eased Ethan back toward his wheelchair. She guided him with the same care she had shown from the first step, her hands steady, her eyes filled with quiet pride. Ethan lowered himself into the seat, his chest rising and falling with exhilaration. For a heartbeat, the entire restaurant remained still. Then a warm, wholehearted applause filled the space, rolling like a gentle wave through the elegant hall. Strangers smiled at Ethan as if he were a hero returning from a journey. Richard blinked against the tears that blurred his vision, his heart pounding with a new, unshakable realization. His son had not just stood, he had led. The band played on, their melodies swelling into a warm, golden current that seemed to carry everyone in the restaurant along with it. Ethan took a hesitant step, his small sneaker squeaking softly on the polished floor. The muscles in his legs trembled under the effort, but he didn't waver. Maya stayed just a breath away, her hand steady on his, moving at the exact pace he set. One small step, then another. Each motion was careful and deliberate, like a fragile promise being fulfilled. The chandeliers above them scattered light across the dance floor, reflecting off the boy's bright eyes until it looked as though he carried his own constellation. His movements were shaky, but the joy on his face outshone every crystal light. He was dancing, truly dancing. In front of strangers, something Richard had once believed might never happen. Around them, the low murmur of conversation faded. Guests set down their wine glasses, forks resting silently on plates. A young couple near the band stopped mid-bite, their smiles softening into wonder. An older man in a gray suit wiped at his eyes with the edge of a napkin. The crowd began to clap softly at first, the sound like distant rain. Then, as Ethan took another brave step, the applause grew, filling the room with a heartbeat of encouragement until the entire restaurant pulsed with gentle rhythm. Richard felt something shift deep inside, a movement that had nothing to do with the music. Pride surged first, fierce and bright, but it was followed quickly by a heavy ache of guilt. How many moments like this had he missed while chasing contracts and acquisitions? How many times had he measured his worth in profit margins instead of the quiet triumph of his son's laughter? For years he had thought of Ethan's life in terms of what the boy could or couldn't do, of medical charts and therapeutic goals. Now he saw it differently. His son wasn't defined by limitations. He was defined by courage, by the unshakable will to move forward even when the world expected stillness. Ethan's face glowed with determination. His small fingers clung to Maya's hand, but it was clear he was guiding the dance. Each step, however wobbly, was his own. Richard's chest tightened as a memory flashed through his mind. Ethan's first physical therapy session years ago, the boy crying in frustration when his legs refused to obey. Richard had promised then that he'd do anything, spend any amount of money, call any specialist to help his son walk freely. Yet here, in this quiet moment, no doctor or dollar had made the difference. It was a simple act of kindness, a waitress's faith that had unlocked something no medical treatment ever could. As the song reached its gentle climax, Maya gave a subtle nod to the band. The saxophone sang one last soaring note. The drums softened to a heartbeat pulse, and the melody faded like the closing of a dream. The room held its breath as Ethan took his final step and then paused, chest rising and falling with effort. Maya knelt beside him again, her voice low and reassuring. "You did it," she whispered, steadying him as he lowered himself back into the wheelchair. She moved with such care that it felt like a continuation of the dance itself. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the restaurant erupted in cheers and applause, no longer soft, but full and joyous. Strangers stood, clapping and whistling, their faces alight with admiration. Some guests wiped away tears. Others simply smiled, their expressions saying what words could not. Ethan's eyes shone with tears of triumph, the glistening drops catching the chandelier light like tiny diamonds. He looked toward his father, searching for approval, for recognition. Richard was already there, kneeling so they were eye to eye. His own vision blurred, and for once he didn't try to hide it. "You were incredible," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've never been prouder." Ethan's answering grin was all the reply needed. "I danced, Dad," he said softly, almost in disbelief. "I really danced." Richard gathered his son into a careful embrace, holding him as if the world outside the restaurant no longer existed. The crowd's applause continued, but Richard barely heard it. What filled him instead was a profound gratitude toward Maya, toward the music, toward this single evening that had shifted the entire axis of his life. When he finally looked up, he saw Maya standing quietly beside them, her smile gentle, almost humble. Their eyes met, and Richard gave a silent nod of thanks that carried the weight of everything he couldn't yet say. She returned the nod with a warmth that needed no words. In that moment, Richard understood something that had eluded him through years of wealth and success. Real change often begins with the simplest gestures. A shared song, an offer hand, the courage of a child willing to take the first step. And as the applause slowly faded into the soft hum of conversation once more, he knew the memory of this dance would guide them both far beyond that glittering room. Richard approached, speechless. The clapping from the other diners faded into a gentle hush as he stood a few feet from Maya, trying to steady the rush of emotions that surged inside him. His throat felt tight, his carefully built armor of businesslike composure dissolving in the warm glow of the chandeliers. "Thank you," he finally whispered, the words trembling as though they had been waiting years to escape. Maya's smile was soft but unwavering. "He just needed someone to believe he could lead," she said. Her voice held no pride, only quiet certainty, as if she had merely uncovered something that had been within Ethan all along. Those words pierced Richard's heart like an unexpected beam of light. Someone to believe he could lead. How many times had Richard convinced himself that leadership came from power, from the ability to control and command? Yet here was his 8-year-old son proving that leadership could be as simple as taking one brave step forward and inspiring others to follow with hope. That night, after the music had faded and the restaurant gradually emptied, Richard silenced his phone, truly silenced it, for the first time in years. No buzzing notifications. No late-night calls from overseas investors. Just the quiet hum of conversation between father and son. He ordered a rich chocolate cake with extra whipped cream, a dessert he might have dismissed as childish indulgence before. Ethan's eyes sparkled when the cake arrived with a single candle flickering like a miniature star. They shared every bite, laughing as the chocolate smeared faintly on Ethan's cheeks. Ethan retold every detail of his first dance, his hands moving animatedly as he described the music, the feeling of standing, the way the crowd had clapped in rhythm. Richard listened intently, not once looking away or glancing at his phone. Each word from his son felt like a melody more captivating than any business success. When they finally returned home, the city's lights twinkling outside the car windows, Richard carried a quiet resolution within him. This evening would not be a fleeting memory. It would be a turning point. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Richard sat in his study with a cup of black coffee and a mind brimming with new purpose. He began making calls, not to corporate partners or market analysts, but to specialists in dance therapy and rehabilitation programs. He researched foundations that supported children with physical challenges, reading testimonials and watching videos of young dancers who had discovered confidence through movement. Within days, he arranged for Ethan to join a renowned dance therapy program known for blending music, rhythm, and gentle exercise to build strength and self-esteem. He requested privacy for his son, but quietly funded scholarships for other children with disabilities to access the same opportunities. He didn't issue a press release or attach his name to a charity gala. This was not about headlines or public image. It was about giving other families the chance to experience the hope he had witnessed when his son first stood to dance. As weeks passed, Richard's once relentless schedule began to shift. Meetings were rescheduled to afternoons so he could attend Ethan's therapy sessions. Even his employees noticed the change in their famously driven CO. His voice warmer in conversations, his eyes less fixed on the ticking of the clock. Ethan, meanwhile, flourished. The boy who once approached physical therapy with cautious effort now greeted each session with enthusiasm. Music became the heartbeat of his routine. He worked diligently, practicing simple steps that gradually turned into graceful sequences. His instructors often marveled at his determination, saying that he inspired other children to push beyond their own fears. Months later, on a bright spring afternoon, Richard sat in the front row of a small community theater. The scent of fresh flowers filled the air as families gathered, chatting excitedly. When the curtain finally rose, Richard's breath caught. There stood Ethan, no wheelchair in sight, supported by a partner, but moving with undeniable independence. His arms flowed with the rhythm, his feet following the beat in a carefully practiced routine that told a story of courage and perseverance. The music swelled, and Ethan executed each step with a quiet confidence that made Richard's heart ache with pride. Around him, the audience clapped and cheered, but Richard hardly heard them. His focus remained solely on his son, whose every movement declared, "I am more than my limitations." As the final note faded, Ethan bowed, his smile radiant. Richard stood, clapping until his palms stung, tears glistening freely. He felt no need to hide them. This moment was richer than any merger, more profound than any victory in the boardroom. After the performance, Richard embraced Ethan, holding him tightly. "You led the whole room," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've never been prouder of anything in my life." Ethan's reply was simple but full of quiet wisdom. "I just remembered what Maya said. Someone had to believe I could." That single sentence stayed with Richard long after the applause ended. It guided his choices in business and in life, reminding him that the greatest investments are not measured in profits, but in people, in love, and in the courage to see potential where others see limits. From that day forward, Richard's life, once ruled by profit and power, revolved around something infinitely more valuable: the joy of watching his son lead, step by step, into a future bright with possibility. And for Richard, every new day felt like the beginning of another dance. If you found this story inspiring, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another powerful video. Thanks for watching.